Hello everyone, welcome to another coin-opulent edition of ARG Presents. I am Amigo Aaron, joined as always by a man who's much like the token machine in an arcade. It's big, it's loud, it just sits around doing nothing, but it's a necessary evil, the Brent.
Hey, everybody comes to me to get what they want.
Oh,
Bam!
necessary evil, that's for sure. So, if you joined us last week, we spun the wheel, we made the deal. And this week, Brent, we'll be playing games from the early 90s arcade area.
Yes.
What do you think about, what was your thoughts of the early 90s in arcades?
Probably the best. This was probably the peak of arcades for me because I wasn't able to go around on my own for the 80s era of arcading. The 90s, early 90s into the mid 90s, I was old enough to have a little more freedoms to go.
You were about 25 then?
No, I would have been 18 in 96, I think.
I see.
So I got to explore these places on my own, meet the colorful characters that were within, and by this time arcades had started to shift. The dark neon lit era was kind of coming to an end, and the more lit up ticket prize machine era was starting to roll in. For better or for worse, I'll have a special place in my heart for the smoke-filled dungeons of like the gold mines and stuff like that. But, you know, they had to adjust. They had to grow, as it were.
I'm glad you brought this up.
All right.
Because I look at arcades in the early 90s from a completely different angle than you. I was around in the 80s. I could go out on my own, for example. Walk around unmolested in these arcades. Dark arcades that were loud, lots of lights, lots of awesome games. The 90s rolled around, and you could see a shift in the way arcade games made money. Yes. And how arcades made money. And that shift was toward the evil temptress, the ticket game. Yes. Now, before the 90s, you had a couple ticket games in the arcade. What you had was basically, you may have one of those basketball shooting games. You had skee ball, for example, or whack-a-mole, and even those, you didn't always get tickets with them. Some of them were just for fun.
Right.
And then the 90s came. The proliferation of crane machines went nuts, but the ticket machines went absolutely bonkers. And what slowly began to happen was the ticket machines pushed the proper arcade pinball machines out the door.
Well, you know why, though?
Because ticket machines made money. I know that.
Money.
Unfortunately, what was great for the arcade operators stunk for most of the rest of us that came in there to play some games.
That's true.
Something else I noticed about the 90s, the early 90s, I was sitting around picking this game, is that I think most of the games I liked were from the 80s, because in early 90s, really the only games I really was into fell into three categories. I'm grouping two offshoots together because they're oddballs. There were some good driving and shooting games that were available at the arcades. There were a lot of beat-em-ups in the arcades, but the majority of the games that I was into were fighting games. Mm-hmm. And you could see how fighting games came in and sort of shoved everything out the door. Gone were your Burger Times or your Defenders. This stuff all made way for instead of having multiple genres, you really only had a few genres in the arcade.
It was big fighting games, toy-based games. Where when I say that, I mean you have some kind of attached gun or big steering wheel, that type of thing. And you know, I think the reason why the shift to fighting games and this kind of era started is back in the 80s, you had a ton of single-player games, and that means you're getting 1 quarter per play. Now, when you go into these multiplayer and the fighting games, you got 2 people playing on the same machine. At the same time, you're making double money that way.
You're right. Of course, you've got one that always wins, they stand. So you're
yeah. Well, yeah, but
that kind of blows a hole in that theory.
No, because it still happens. You're still going to eventually put more money in. That guy's going to fall. He's going to put more money. It's a continuous cycle. As to where, I mean, how often did you stand in line, per se, for a single player game.
Not
did
often.
it.
Not
if
often.
someone was playing it, I just left, and if I happened to come back around and they were gone. Fighting games, man, I would line up my quarters on the bezel, and I was there. Locked in until it was my turn. I put the money in and went.
Of course, I remember going with you to the truck stop to play a fighting game,
yes.
and which we should not have been at. I'll tell you, the quantum shift that took place in the arcades happened in the early 90s, and I'll give an example. I went away to work in Lexington, Kentucky. We had two really classic arcades there. One was the Kentucky Arcade, and one was a place called Tony's. And they were traditional arcades, dark. You could smoke in them, and they had pinball. They had a full selection of pinball and arcade games. They had classics. They had fighting games. They had it all. There was a series of arcades in West Virginia called the Gold Mine Arcades, and I think it was a nationwide arcade. Our mall, local mall, had two of them.
Yeah.
Eventually, one closed, but they were your classic gold mine themed arcades, dark and that's the way we liked them. When I came back from Lexington in the early 90s, the gold mines were gone. They'd been replaced by what was more of a family fun center style game called the Tilt.
The Tilt.
And the Tilt sucked.
Oh, the Tilt was a national chain too.
It sucked. It had nothing but ticket games and broken down crap games. Didn't like it.
In the beginning, the Tilt was just like all the other arcades at the time. There was a mix of the two. But they were really bad about not maintaining their actual video games. The ticket machines and
they maintained those.
They did better, but the video games they didn't maintain. It was sad. It was sad. It was always sad for me in the late 90s to really watch that decline.
Yeah, and as the 90s rolled on, the Tilt ended up becoming a Primitives art store, which is a real bummer. I go past it all the time, just like, oh.
Now, you do know our local mall does have an arcade in it again.
Oh, really? No,
yes.
I didn't know that.
It is all claw machines and ticket games, every bit of it.
Well, there's your stinger right there.
And massive driving games.
But we're going to go back to a time where video games were still in the arcades. Our games both come from mine's from the early 90s. I didn't catch the year on yours, so we picked a couple. I'll have to say that I waffled all week long in trying to determine what game to play. And I wanted to cover a fighting game, but since I just covered one, I thought I would try something a little bit different and try to pick a game that not too many people have played.
Yeah.
And so I'll lead the charge this week, Brent, if I may.
Sure.
And the game we're talking about this week, for me, is Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder. Now,
Great name. Holy cow, good name.
If you had a pulse in the late 80s, you will know about the Golden Axe game. Golden Axe, I distinctly remember playing it the first time in a 7-Eleven in Huntington when I was in college, and just thinking, holy cow, look at this game. What a game. It's a game where you pick from 3 different battlers and you can play 1 or 2 players as you roll through this side-scrolling beat 'em up to go and finally kill off the Death Adder, which is this big, huge guy that had magical powers, had a big axe, and rescue some people. And it was an awesome game. What made it great at the time, of course, it had great graphics, it had great music, but it was fun. It was a lot of moves, there was a lot of freedom to it,
sure.
and it was a very different sort of a scrolling beat 'em up style game. So everyone, of course, anxiously awaits sequels to these things. And honestly, I awaited this sequel, and the sequel really never came to West Virginia. And I think I've only played this game in the arcade maybe once or twice. I know I've seen it. I don't
think I'll ever have.
I've seen it at least once, and I remember being turned off when I played it because it was ignorance, frankly. But it apparently, I don't know how well it did in the arcades, or I don't have numbers on how well it sold. But it's sort of a hidden gem in a lot of ways, and so that's one of the reasons I picked it this week. So this game came out in 1992. So again, this was the early 90s, and this was published by Sega, developed by their Sega AM1 team. Pretty, obviously they've done a lot of great stuff, and this was on the Sega System 32 hardware. Some of the main things that you may have heard of that were on that hardware. In fact, I almost picked a couple of these. One thing Sega did in the early 90s that I thought was a great game was Spider-Man, the video game. And it was done on the System 32. You remember that one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It was a lot of fun. You got to pick between Spider-Man, Namor, I believe was the guy you could pick. I'm trying to think who the other ones were you could play. Hawkeye, of course, was one of the guys you could play. I'm a big Hawkeye fan.
The woman, the black cat. We're black. Help me out here, Aaron.
Black Cat.
Yeah, there you
go. So you also on that particular hardware, the Sega C32, the Sonic the Hedgehog the arcade game, which is another one you didn't see around here. I mean, I don't think I ever saw it. Do you? But I've played it in emulation. Cool Riders. Let's see here, Holocene. If you'll remember Holocene,
yes.
Yeah. So it had some Arabian Fights, another one I remember seeing. So it had some decent titles, but again, most of the stuff that came out of it was really not stuff that was local to this area, and I'm guessing maybe some of the big Sega arcades might have gotten it.
Sure.
But of course, at this point, we weren't getting that much new stuff. It's not like the 80s where you got to see everything.
We certainly weren't getting much more of the fighters, that's for sure.
What makes Golden Axe or Revenge of the Death Adder different? Well, one of the things that makes a difference is all the characters in the first game are effectively not in this game. Now, with a but, which we'll get to. And you get some really oddball characters in this one. So your choices in this are Goa the Giant, excuse me, Stern the Barbarian, Dora, I love this one, Dora the Kenturide, Kentauride. Instead of Centaur, it's a Kentauride.
Well, and there's a reason for that.
And you get a young elf named Little Trix. All right, now, these characters are goofy.
Yeah.
Only Stern is who is much like the barbarian in the first game, just a big sword-wielding Conan style guy. Goa the Giant is a giant guy who has the dwarf from the first game, so I think his name was Thunderhead, riding on his back. Now, I read no explanation as to why this is occurring. I don't know if the dwarf was injured in the first game, or he just got lazy. I don't know what's going on, or maybe he got old. I don't know what's going on, but he's riding this guy. Now, Dora is a centaur, effectively, right? I mean, what do you mean, eh?
Well, she's a centaur when she wants to be.
Right. Now, much like in the first game, you can ride animals, a lot of different animals in this one. And Dora, whenever she rides an animal, her horse bottom just turns into human.
Yeah. I can only assume they made a centaur, went through all the animations, then they were like, okay, now how are we going to put the centaur on this bug? And they were like, ooh. and then, of course, you've got Little Trix. And Little Trix is, like I said, a little elf with a pitchfork. And he's small, he's quick. He's fast,
he doesn't do much damage, but he is what he is. So, much like the first game, Death Adder's back. Death Adder's this big, massive, helmeted killer of men who is trying to enslave the world again.
And it's done a really good job. I guess between the two games where you freed everyone and this game, you must have been on vacation because the whole world is already pre-enslaved.
Yeah. So what happened was Death Adder was revived, and you've got to basically go to Death Adder's castle of certain death, which is modeled after Death Adder. It's a big like a mountain with Death Adder's torso on it, going like, "Mah."
They must have worked double time to get that done for his reappearance.
Well, I mean, when you've got as many slaves as the D-Man's got, you basically are good to go. And along the way, you fight. I mean, this game is much more expansive, larger than the original. I mean, it's probably at least twice as long. Long game.
I would not say it's twice as long.
It is long. And something that separates this from the... there's many things that separate this from the previous game. We'll go over a few. So, in the original game, it was very linear. Mm-hmm. As you went along, which I always thought this was cool, a hand had a map, and it would unfurl, and it would draw out your path on the map. This one has a similar gimmick. Basically, a guy opening a map and pointing, like, okay, here, we're going to go here, we're going to go here. So when you take your guy or your team, this actually supported up to 4 players.
Yeah.
Another thing that the first one didn't do. Now I've never got to play this with 4 players. I'd love to. It'd be awesome. But when you play this game, your path is much like say Outrun. You get to pick which way you go, and there are several choices that you make. And when you make the choices, like for example, I believe the first choice is you could go. I'm going to go to the cave, or I could go in the forest. I'm going to take the desert or the pier is another one of the choices. Yeah. And when you take these choices, that's the way you go, and so you won't see that other.
Yeah, it's completely gone. Once you say I'm not going to the desert, there's no like we'll circle back around, or they'll just artificially put it later in the stage. It's gone. Right. You just don't get to play it that round.
So. Like the other game, you've got your jump button, you've got your attack button, and you've got a magic button. Yeah. Magic is a little different in this.
It's a lot different.
You have to have some magic at a certain level to use the magic. But magic seems to be the potions are a lot more plentiful.
Tons more potions, but the magic is not nearly as devastating.
It works on the same. It depends. But if you have the most magic, you do pretty good. But it works on the same system as the original. There's little imps, thieves run around, and you whack them, and they drop the potions. You grab them, and you stock up that way. Unlike the first game, for example, this one might have some treasure chests sitting around, or barrels, or something like that. And they'll have stuff in it, sort of like a double dragon or something like that, or a final fight where they have stuff stashed.
And of course, you've always got your access to food at various destructible points and whatnot.
Now, which there's a little green imp that carries food around. You can whack him. So that stuff hasn't changed that much. But what has changed is it's like everything from the first game turned up to 11.
Yeah, it's bad.
In the first game, you could ride a dragon, and this you could ride a couple different praying mantises. Yeah. You can ride an undead dragon. And along the way you'll also come across like catapults and or racks of automatic arrow shooting like devices. When you're not on an animal, you can man these and just basically go. But you can't move them.
Even if you're on an animal,
right? But I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So when you're not on an animal, you can use these and you can shoot backwards or forwards with them. When you're on an animal, you literally pick these things up and mount them to the animal, and you're a mobile turret, which is awesome. You're walking around on a fire-breathing mantis shooting flaming balls at the enemy. It's tremendous. I love that stuff.
It's over the top. That's for sure.
It's outstanding. This game, it said, okay, what can we do to blow people away? And then they just did everything they could. Yeah. The bad guys are smarter. They're more diverse. You've got your usual bad guy elements, bad warrior guys. But then you've also got like these natives that come out. They look like they remind me of the crazy fighter from World Hero with the big mask. They look like jungle cannibals. Yeah. There's a bunch of varieties of those. There are all kinds of end bosses in this. Some you'll recognize from the first game, like those 2 bald brother jerks. Remember those guys that use the hammers? They're like, oh, they laugh all the time. They're in this. They play a big role in this game. You'll fight them a couple times.
Well, that's really the problem. Is there's less bosses than you think because there are a lot of duplicates.
There's a lot of bosses though, and the boss fights they're plentiful. You also will come across another one of my favorites. Is this crazy green barbarian. The first game had little elements of humor in it, and this game carries that over in spades. Yeah. There's a great scene where you come up on this guy and there's this tent that's shaking, and all of a sudden this barbarian guy pops out. He's had trouble getting out of the tent. He's a big green, like an orc or an ogre or something. And you fight this guy. When you finally dispatch him, the tent falls on him, which is funny. He gets covered back up in it. There's a lot of little tweaks and amusing bits in it. The game also introduced team-up moves. Yeah. You could get with like your buddy, and you could do a thing where like basically you both jump up in the air, like do a big slam or a power bomb. The team element's more important in this. Tricks is not. I never liked Tricks, but when you're playing in a group, he's great because his magical ability, it doesn't hurt people. He will grow trees, and on the tree, little trees will be fruit, and it gives you health. So effectively, he's a healer for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And
which
so
sucks when he's solo.
Trix is the weakest character by a long ways in a solo game. the game has many diverse worlds. These are long levels that have a lot of stuff in them. You'll go everywhere from like cult-laden caverns with skeletons to boats. You'll be on a moving boat at one point. You're in the desert. You're going down streets. There are interesting times when you're going through and the enemy has banners and it's almost like an open battlefield that you're on, and there's all kinds of stuff out there. One thing that's in this game, since Death Adder is such an arrogant jerk, his statues are like everywhere, and you can always smash them. It's very satisfying too. Something else that the first game didn't have a whole lot of. This game has tons and tons of actual slaves. And you can free him, or you can not free him if you don't want. I mean, if you want to skip or you just don't get around to it. But like often, you can just walk over and whack a chain. They'll come off and they run off. And as far as I can tell, much like in the first game, there's a grading system at the end that tells you how well you did. F to A, triple plus, I think what it is.
Well, and it gives like 1 in a million, 1 in 100,000.
And I've read, like last time I played this game, I got A plus plus. And I've read that to get everything, you have to rescue everyone, find all the stuff, But so I did pretty good. The game has a lot of interesting little puzzly elements. Like you'll come in an area where there'll be bags hanging from the ceiling. You can jump up and whack them, and sometimes there'll be treasure in there or a potion. Sometimes there'll be a skeleton in there, for example. There's elements where you pull chains and open cage. Open like cell doors, and sometimes you'll open a slave will come out, or there'll be treasure, and sometimes skeleton will be in there, or one of these tree people that'll come out. So there's a lot of different elements in that regard. There's I should have mentioned that the woods are very cool. There's these little sticks that appear that just kind of uses sort of like small scaling to turn into like stick people when you fight. Something else this game introduced is a sort of a 3D walking into the background element in some scenes.
They use it a lot for transferring from one area to another. So it's better than just a loading screen or just a click off, click on. But it's used to transition from one place to another. But you can still fight in them. Which makes it
it's pretty interesting, and some are better than others. I mean, it's a pretty good effect, really. It's not. I mean, it wouldn't want to base a whole game on it, but it's still.
They use it maybe 3 or 4 times during the game,
and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool when you, like Brent said, you can fight when you're going through it, and it gives you a good sense of depth. There's some very unique elements that you normally wouldn't expect. For example, when you're on the boat, you get to a point where these tentacles are coming up to the boat bottom. And if they grab you, they will suck you in. You're gone. But if you chop them up, you can eat them and get health, which I thought was funny. There's another scene where you're captured by one of those bald brother jerks, and he hangs you from the ceiling, and you wiggle back and forth to get down. And then when you get down, you can clobber one of those little imps that's sitting there mocking you. There's a cut scene in this sort of where or a bonus stage where you're walking to this city, and they're cooking. They've got a spit, and they got a turkey or something on the spit, and it starts bouncing around, and you've got to go whack it. I don't know what. I'm not sure how to eat that.
What's going on there?
It's got some little cut scenes that are for like one time where you go to a market. They're not really cut scenes, but they're just little scenes that happen when you as you go through that they're not really combat related, just kind of fun. There's also the old scene where you're sleeping and the little jerks come and try to steal your stuff. You got to do that thing. There's a lot going on in this. It's a lot of fun. The ending's interesting. When you finally get to go to Death Adder's mountain castle, as you defeat the stages there, parts of Death Adder's castle fall off.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
And so when you finally get to his head, the man himself shows up with his big face shield. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but it involves riding a dragon. At one point, that's pretty cool. You're riding on a dragon. I'd say this game has more akin to the Dungeons and Dragons scrollers than it does the original Golden Age.
It's a less complicated D&D.
Well, I think it's actually I think it's a better game, to be completely honest with you, because I think it's more lighthearted and fun. I just do it. I think it goes quicker. I like the D&D games. Don't get me wrong, but I really like this game a lot. It sounds good. The diversity of characters. I really enjoy it. What? Now you have played this before. What did you think?
I've got a few problems with it.
All right.
First of all, Don't make a centaur character that's only a centaur when it's convenient. That actually really bugged me about this game.
Well, I'm sure they've got some kind of storyline thing that I've never seen.
No, yeah, the storyline is, oops, we screwed up.
I don't think they screwed up. They knew what they were doing. This is Sega AM too. They know what they're doing.
Dude, no, it's so ridiculous. Because there's times when she wouldn't want to be a centaur, that she's still a centaur. Like when they hang her up, like if she turned into a human, she would just fall out of her bindings, but she doesn't.
Well, she's bound up by the hands.
Yeah.
Oh, you're being
garbage. I hate that. I hate her as a character. I don't like playing as her. I just wish she wasn't even in the game.
She does have a padded, like, she looks like she's using one of those American Gladiator, like, poles. You know, they used to have the joust or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like an effective weapon. And oh, by the way, she's not that great a fighter. So.
Well, I mean, she's got some neat attacks, but her magic's pretty weak, too. But the game overall, to me, it's a simplified Dungeons and Dragons tower game.
When you say simplified, what do you mean? Is it the magic system that you think is too simple, because I mean it's got more moves.
In the D&D game, you have to scroll through your items and your magic, use it because it's a 4-button game instead of a 3-button game.
Yeah.
Which makes it more complicated because you have to be aware of what you've got selected to use it efficiently.
That game came out several years later too.
It did. Yes.
So I mean, you have that going for you too.
But what I'm saying now, as of which one I would prefer to play, I would actually prefer to play that one. Not to say this is a bad game. It's about the right length. It's about 30 minutes if you just credit through it.
Oh, I think it's longer than that. I played it last night. I played it all the way through, and I'm telling you, it's longer than 30 minutes. Yeah.
I think, as with all these games, if you've got 3 or 4 people playing with you, it's going to be a blast just because it's fun to play with other people in these type of games.
And the multi-moves are a lot of fun. That's something else you don't have in the D&D game.
Yeah, they're not bad.
And there's different ones. Something else I failed to mention is when you use your magic, if you overpower the enemy thoroughly, you get like a cut scene of the enemy like melting. It's an awesome scene, or getting mauled. The magic is. I will say the magic effects in this. I thought the first one, first one had cooler effects. I do like the melting of the guy, but I like the effects in the first game better.
The big dragon coming down in the first one.
I agree. That is one. That's one of the few areas that I thought the first one led. Also, I really was a big fan of the dwarf in the first one, so not having him available. I think the 2 flaws in the game, the big flaws for me, are the fact that you can't play. I wish they had kept some of the other old characters.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Axe Battlers and Stern are pretty much the same guy, but the dwarf not being there is a bummer. And the chick was pretty good too, but she had all the magic, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't like and the centaurs. My kid always plays as her, but I'm not a fan. And tricks, nobody plays as unless you're playing in a group or you're a glutton for punishment. Now, again, this game came out in '92. And so if you're not familiar with the arcade version, you might be asking yourself, where the hell does this come from? Well, it never got a home port anywhere.
That's crazy.
Can you believe that? Now, the word on the street is that it was determined that this was just too much of a game to port. It would be too epic a port for what was available at the time. So if you've ever played, well, now hold on a second. Have you played Golden Axe 2 on the Genesis? It's not good. It's not that good, and I think they may be on to something. I mean, this is a huge game. I mean, it's bigger than you think it is.
It's a large game.
There's a lot going on, and I think you probably would have had to go on, like, say, the Saturn to get a proper port of it.
Okay, well, why not port it to the Saturn?
Well, it's just by that time, I guess they had moved on, man.
Yeah, I think this could have sold on the Saturn.
Well, I think it would have. I think you could release this now, to be honest with you, and play. I mean, listen, beat 'em up.
Maybe some kind of pack.
Listen, everyone loves Golden Axe. They remember it fondly, and this is a game that hasn't gotten a home release. Think about that. There can't be too many games. I mean, and this is the Golden Axe series. Yeah. This isn't like Altered Beast 2 or something, which, I mean, this is a big deal. So it surprises me that it has not gotten released. So I looked this thing up on eBay. Of course, there's no home release, so all I can only do is look up the arcade machine. I couldn't find Arcade Machine 1.
No PCB.
But I did find the PCB that.
Okay.
Now, there were none currently available.
Right.
But one sold for in the U.S. sometime in the last couple months for $300.
That's pretty good.
It's a jam board, and then I saw the Marquee had recently sold for $32. Marquee's pretty good. I did find some reviews. GameSpot, the player score gave this 7.5. ARC gave it 9 out of 10. Honest Gamers gave it a 4 out of 5.
9 out of 10. That's ridiculous. That's way too high.
I think. I mean, as far as beat 'em ups go, this is at the top. And trust me when I tell you, me and the boy have played them all. This one's at the top of the heap.
Well,
And I will say one thing before I close up. I think this is a fair game that doesn't cheat very often. Now, there are a few times, and I mentioned those tentacles, for example, that I think the game is trying to get your quarters. But I think this plays a fair game. I never really thought that I was getting screwed in this game.
Except for Death Adder himself. But that's
no,
different.
not even him. I thought he played a fair game.
He's pretty.
He's not. Listen. He's not the easiest, but he's not the hardest by any stretch of the imagination. So there you go. That's Golden Axe, Revenge of Death Adder. If you ever get a chance, pop into your favorite emulator and give it a shot.
Yep.
So Brent, what do you got for us this week?
With the passing of Stan Lee, I felt it was somewhat appropriate to go with X-Men, the arcade game. I mostly am focusing on the 6-player Mega Cabinet, but before we get to that, Stan Lee, as we both know, passed away November 12th, which was also my birthday. What a horrible birthday present. But, I mean, he lived an incredible life.
95.
95 years old. You can't be too upset. I mean, you can be upset, but you can't be, he did what he was going to do in life. 95 is an incredible run.
Well, I mean, if you think, I was thinking about this the other night. I love Stan Lee. I've obviously collected comic books for many years, and before that, I watched all the cartoons. And even as a little kid, I knew who Stan Lee was. Everyone knew him because he had a editorial on most books, and he was everywhere. His name was everywhere. His voice was everywhere. His iconic voice. And if you think about it, what shape would modern Hollywood be in if Stan Lee had not sat down and cranked out a bunch of these characters? Now, did he create every character in Marvel? No, which has been reported wild, like Captain America. He didn't do this. But Fantastic Four, X-Men, Spider-Man, those are his babies. And if you think about the amount of superhero movies that are getting released right now, it boggles the mind. And I remember a time where they tried like gangbusters forever to get. I always heard for years and decades about a Spider-Man movie, and so when they finally made one, it was a pretty big deal, and it did well. I mean, if Spider-Man didn't do well, that first one, and I don't mean the old 70s one, I mean the modern one. I mean, if it hadn't done well, that may have been all the superhero you were going to get. But it was a great movie. They had enough common sense to include Stan. All these movies, his appearances became iconic. You would look for him in every film. In fact, I read that he filmed future appearances because just in case he passed away. So he'll probably be appearing for the next couple decades.
And he also has given his permission to be cameoed in CGI or advertisements, stuff like that, moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, and he was also he was always a good guy. I read a ton of his editorials. They were often, he was very into equal rights. He was very into anti-bigotry. That was staples of or anti-bullying was something. There were things you read about quite a bit in his editorials. If you ever bothered to read them, I was one of those kids that I would read them, and or his letter, people that sent him letters. And he was a real influential guy. I mean, as a person, I didn't know him, so but everyone says good things about him. But I mean, in terms of his influence, I don't think it can be overstated. The amount of the amount of stuff that he put out that we have now that are active IPs. I mean, cartoons, books. I mean, we've both watched the old X-Men cartoons. I watched the Avengers cartoons. Stan Lee appears in the Lego games.
Yeah,
he's everywhere.
I mean, he's been attributed to making Spider-Man, X-Men, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Fantastic Four, Black Panther, Daredevil, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man. Not all of those on his own, of course. Some of those he had.
Yeah, like he had Steve Ditko in there and some other guys that were
Kirby and
Kirby, of course, yeah.
But he always, one of his big things, even when because his later years, he had a lot of unfortunate conflict with some of his family members.
Yeah, that was tough.
But he was always someone who said, go and do what you like, don't go out there and just do what you have to do to get by. Do what you like and try to make money off that. I mean, you can't always do that, of course, but he was someone that did do that, and it worked for him.
He was a self-made man that worked his way up from the lowest possible level of publishing in a comic book world, and it was a veteran, and so it was a very sad day. I mean, it really made me very, very sad, and I'm not sure I'll get over it. I mean, I think there are certain. I mean, listen, I'm not a big Hollywood crazy follower of guys, but there are certain guys that I really had a lot of affinity for. And Stan was one of them, and it was a real brutal one for me.
Absolutely, and as sort of a tribute to him, and also I have personal stories about this game. I chose X-Men. That's right. X-Men is another beat 'em up at its core, for sure. That takes you through what was essentially the Fox Saturday morning cartoon. That's what this was based off of. The actual episode, or I guess comic book that this was based off of, it's sort of a mesh, but it was based off a comic book that they had incorporated, where Magneto had taken over and was trying to enslave the world. Characters in the game are widespread. I mean, for a game like a beat 'em up, 6 playable characters. Of course, you've got Cyclops, Colossus, Dazzler, probably her only big main role video game appearance.
Yeah, I'll get into that later.
Nightcrawler, Storm, and Wolverine.
Right.
So that's a pretty good cast. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Supporting characters in the game, of course, you've got Shadowcat, Kitty Pryde, and Professor X doing both voice roles in the game. It takes you through. You start off on Earth, and then you end up going through New York. Then you get onto an asteroid and out on Earth's orbit. That is an asteroid controlled by Magneto.
Asteroid M.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. The stages range from interesting background-wise. Some of the city backgrounds are very interesting. It has fun things to look at in the background. Some of the backgrounds are not interesting. You do a lot of corridor fighting in this, which is never fun.
There's massive expanses of metal corridors and
right. However, for boss characters, holy moly! I don't think there's a game that has this beat 'em up that has this many unique boss characters. You have Aaron, come on now. You have Magneto, Mystique, White Queen, that's Emma Frost, the Juggernaut, Blob, Pyro, Wendigo, Living Monolith, Nimrod, and Bonebreaker. All fightable bosses in the game. Now, are all those your common, everyday named villains? No. But they are still from the comic book. If you're a huge comic book nerd, you know who all those people are. And probably your general public know who about half of them are. You also have your own mutant powers. Everyone has their own special ability. Cyclops shoots his beam. Colossus, for some reason. Dazzler, what is Dazzler's bomb thing? It's just energy.
It's
bomb,
light,
right?
yeah. Dazzler's light-based powers.
Nightcrawler, of course, gets his teleporty run around and punch everybody. Storm does her tornadoes and lightning, and Wolverine does his berserker barrage with his claws. I know you're dying to kill this. Why do you hate this game so much?
I don't hate this game.
I love it.
I don't hate this game. Not at all. But in fact, I would say I was a fan of the game, and I've played it a million times. But I played it again last night and to completion. And this game does one thing that bugged me from the second I played it. No, well that does bug me. The fact that you can only use your mutant powers on occasion is irritating as heck. You earn the ability to use your mutant powers. So, like for example. Let's take an example here. I'm Cyclops.
That's right.
Okay. What does Cyclops do? He shoots unibeams with his visor, right?
That's right.
Well, you can shoot 1, 2, maybe even 3 unibeams. Then all Cyclops does is punch and kick. Well, guess what? He stinks at that. Storm, another good example. Storm, the mistress, the weather witch. Once you shoot a couple of tornadoes, then she's punching and kicking. It's not like Wolverine
or Colossus.
Colossus. They're okay. But I mean, you've got these characters, and then the inclusion of I don't like the version of Storm they use. I like the Mohawk version. She looks more awesome.
This was based off the characterization of the Saturday morning cartoon.
See, I don't agree with you on that.
No, it is.
No, it may be, but it's not the one you're thinking of. They did a pilot. Well, they did a pilot cartoon called Pride of the X-Men.
That's right.
Which I'm guessing that's the one it's based off of. That sucked. It was, and that's why I know it didn't get picked up. Kitty Pryde got phased out. No pun intended. You like what I did there because it's phasing. But anyway, she got phased out and was not a big player in the vaulted, highly appreciated Marvel cartoon that ran after that first little dinky cartoon.
Correct.
But the fact that she could get captured was stunning. She could go through walls.
Well, now, okay, they put her in an electrified super cage. To be fair,
now,
they did think
also
of that.
Dazzler. Now, Dazzler was a dud character. How she got included, it makes me sick that here we've got the animated series from the 90s that had Gambit. And Gambit's my boy. And Rogue, you had all these real studs in there, but in this you're going to play Dazzler. Dazzler sucks. And the thing is, the funny thing is, as a character, she's far from the worst. She's actually one of the better characters to play. But her inclusion is goofy to me. There are other. I'll get to the rest of my problems.
Here's the thing with an X-Men game: you're never going to have all the characters you want. Ever.
You're right,
because people are going to have their favorites.
Listen, show me who likes Dazzler.
I think Dazzler was included because she was a female character that was representable in the video game.
I think they were trying to get her over. That's the only thing I can guess, because I remember they tried to push her, and it just no dice. But go ahead, I've got more to say, but I want to go ahead and get into the game.
Now, this was a 1992 release, and it did a few things that other games had done, but it did it better than anyone else. And then it did a few things for the first time. I didn't know that they got attributed to this.
All right.
Attacking a downed opponent.
Yeah. First
time ever done, X-Men. Can you believe that? In a beat 'em up. Yeah. I'm telling you.
I have to ponder that.
Yeah, that's what it's got credit for it. The other thing is, this came out in more cabinet variations than any arcade game I can think of. This had a 2-player cab, which was your standard cab, where you would use the joystick to select what character you wanted to play.
Which we owned, by the way.
Yes, for a short time. It also came out in a 4-player cab, which was your standard 4-player cabs, 2 joysticks in the middle, the primo spots, and then 2 joysticks sort of off to the side, but still could see the screen well enough to play. Also, chose your character at the beginning by left and right on the joystick. And then the monster. The one that probably has made this game more famous than anything else, outside, of course, of its theming. The 6-player cab. This was a monster of a machine. The control panel has 6 joysticks, 3 buttons per stick. You've got your 2 primos in the middle, 2 sort of off to the side, and then your final ones are standing 90 degrees to the screen, looking at each other. And the joysticks are turned in such a way that you can't just... You have to sort of stand at this weird cockeyed angle. And the absolute worst part about this is you did not select your character by on-screen prompts. You selected your character by putting your quarter into the slot that you wanted to play as the person.
Horrible.
So, you had a ton of free games on this if you were smart enough to go look for them. Because people would put a quarter in, try to play at the primo sticks, but they had put their quarter in a character that was off to the side.
I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles did the exact same thing with the 4-player version.
Well, 4-player is a lot less confusing.
But I'm pretty sure that you picked by position. Yeah.
So, who got the screw jobs at the 90-degree angles? That was to the left would have been Cyclops, and to the right would have been Dazzler.
The two weakest characters.
They weren't pushing her too hard.
Yeah.
Down from them in the better but not great positions, you've got Cyclops on the left and Nightcrawler on the right. And then your primo sticks, dead in the middle, can see the screen, enjoy the game. You've got Wolverine on the left and Storm on the right. Something about the screen in this 6-player cabinet. It's actually 2 monitors wide. This is 1992. They didn't have the technology to cheaply put in any kind of wide screen. So they put a monitor in the case, down in the base of the case, and then a monitor that stuck out the back of the case. So what they did was the monitor that was sticking out of the back of the case was just, you saw the monitor as normal. The one that was mounted in the bottom of the case reflected onto a mirror, and then you could kind of use the dials to mesh them together so you could get a pretty decent middle scene.
It worked pretty well, I thought, yeah. It's quite a wonderment.
It does better than you would think.
Yeah, it does.
Especially for 1992. When you walk in and you see this cabinet, it is loud. It is massive. I think the control panel alone weighs something like 130 pounds.
It's a massive. You don't see these much anymore.
No, and it for moving purposes, it splits down the middle, so you can have your control panel carrying one thing, and then the back has the 2 monitors and the logic board and the speakers and stuff like that. And that unit, with the monitors installed, is like 600 pounds. It's stupid ridiculous.
It's funny. I saw this cabinet just probably 10 years ago at a comic book store down here that had one. You remember that? They had the full 6-player version. The monitors weren't in the best shape, but they were still playable. And occasionally you would come across these 6-player units where one of the monitors would be out when you
couldn't play it. Yeah, because you'd only see half the screen.
Yeah.
But that is something to note about these cabinets is, and this is really true of arcade cabinets in general. If you've never looked inside of them, they're mostly empty space.
Yeah.
And this is no exception. You could easily, and I'm talking easily, hide a person inside the control panel of an X-Men arcade game.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You could probably put a cabaret in the back.
So that's just trying to get you to imagine how massive these things are. And it was both to its detriment and to its benefit, because a lot of arcades didn't have the room for them.
Yeah, you would take up bare minimum the space of 2 machines.
Yes.
And when you've got all the people crowded around it, you had to have a really unique space.
A 3 or 4 machine with it, at least.
Yeah.
The game itself, it's a beat 'em up. It didn't break any ground outside of being able to hit opponents in the bottom. The animations are slick. The graphics of the characters are really nice. You can always tell who you are. You're mostly fighting Sentinel robots. And then you've got some other
power armored guys with bazookas to fight those guys.
Mutated guys.
There's alligator men.
Yep.
There's alligator men that breathe fire. There's robotic insects.
Robotic arms that shoot lasers.
Then you've got the Ravagers, which is again one of the cheaper elements of the game. Those guys that have the tank turrets on the bottom and the upper torso of a man with a gun.
Yep.
Those guys suck. They sucked in the comics. They suck in this. You've got the robots go for range from just guys that lumber out like idiots to guys that shoot missiles, guys that shoot lasers. There's a whole flurry of different types of guys. You've got one thing I was wondering if you're going to talk about, were those weird mole people that they have that interesting scaling effect on them. You know, the ones
the ones that as you get bigger, the more you punch on them.
Yeah, no. I mean, they grow from the ground up, and they look. They're that's kind
of. Actually, they do grow.
It reminds me a little bit of the 3D effect in X-Men. They just kind of, Golden Axe. They kind of pop up, and they go from small to large. Yeah, and when you kill them, it's sort of like a monkey too, and they go, and then you die. So you've got they've got some interesting characters. I mean, you're right. It's mostly Sentinels you're beating.
Yeah, the game is the hook of the game is play as an X-Men character, beat up bad guys that you kind of know.
Yeah.
The game is infamous for some of its quotes.
Yes, Magneto's got quite a vocabulary.
Some of Magneto's better quotes. I am Magneto, Master of Magnet.
Yeah.
Apparently, he can only control one now. X Chicken as an insult. Of course, you've got the most famous line: X-Men, welcome to die.
Yeah.
So this was full of poor translations.
I think he also says, "You are now dead."
Yes,
that's another one he says.
that's
You are
another-
dead. He laughs.
So this game was a Konami game. It was released in Japan first. Japan's cabinets are actually, or game is a little bit different.
Really?
As you go through on the Japanese version, you can collect health items and more mutant power-ups.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So,
so
time to change the ROM over.
That's
eh?
right. So, and that was a huge deal because the American version, you gained health at the end of the level, you refilled your health, and you got one additional use of your mutant power, which that's insane. I've never seen a beat 'em up where you can't collect health somewhere in the game before this. Also, this was released on the 360, the PlayStation Store, and it later came to mobile. Something they had to change was all the voices. That they did not have the copyright for the voices, so they had one guy record all of the male voices and one girl record all the female voices moving forward. So anything
That's weird.
Yeah, so the Xbox and anything that isn't the arcade version has alternate voices in it.
That's weird.
Now, they did keep the same broken English. It was a direct translation, but it's all voice acted by different people now. Another tidbit about this game for the 6-player version is if you've got everyone on the screen, or everyone playing at the same time, you get more enemies on the screen.
Right.
So you can have some of the most sprites of any game of the era on the screen at the same time, which was one of the reasons why they had to use a lot of similar looking. You don't fight when you're fighting Sentinels. You're fighting Sentinels. That's it. You're just fighting Sentinels. It's the same color, the same everything, over and over and over. And when you switch up and then you're fighting like alligator people, that's what you fight. You don't fight a mix of the two. Very rarely.
You do.
There are
you do
sometimes, but it's
yeah.
very rarely. But this has some of the most sprites on the same screen at the same time of any game ever.
I have played 6 people on this at once, and it is something.
Yeah.
It's tough to be those Gin people. It's a tough game to play for. I mean, it's an ill-conceived game in a lot of ways because adding the 6 players, while it's a good gimmick, I mean, it surely didn't happen all that often.
It's a really good gimmick, and let me tell you why. Personal story time. We used to have a place called Rock Lake. I'm sure you know it. When it was actually a pool.
Yep.
Well, after it shut down as being a pool, it became kind of a putt-putt family fun center. Very popular in the early 90s over in the United States. They ran a special on Friday night called Midnight Golfing. And what it was you paid, I think it was $10 or $12. You could putt-putt as much as you wanted. You got 40 game tokens. You got 1 free laser tag, a free popcorn, and a free Coke.
What a bargain.
It was a heck of a deal. Started at 9 p.m. on Friday, and they closed at 12. That's why they call it Midnight Golfing. We would go almost every week. My crew of about, at lowest, we'd have 3 people going. At most, we'd have 10 or 12. So we were a pretty big crew at this thing. We would go and buy multiple wristbands, or if the ladies that we took didn't want their tokens, we would get the tokens from them, add it to our own stash, and they had a 6-player X-Men game. We would play through it almost, we didn't play through it every time we went, but we played through it a lot. And you would have kids, because, even at 9 p.m., it was supposed to be more of a teenager atmosphere because of the late night, but you still had kids running around too. And the kids would want to play, and they would just go and just smash the mutant power button over and over and over, and then die, and then leave, and then, but it was a great time. It was a great time. We always loved playing the game. And when you've got 40 tokens, you can, this isn't the only game we played, but it was definitely enough with enough people to get through the game, probably 10 or 12 tokens each.
Mm.
So Yeah. Personal experience with the game. Really love playing 6 players. It's just so much fun. It's chaos too.
Now, I can't get through this without further deriding this game because it's got a lot of problems that I don't like.
It does.
Number one, in the Konami tradition, this game is cheap. Cheap deaths. Cheap. In the immortal words of Tommy Wiseau, cheap. This game does not play a fair game with you.
I don't agree
I don't.
with that,
I don't like in the later levels the power suit guys. They have this little jumpy back move they use, and then they fire that bazooka, which is cheap. You've got guys coming right off the screen, coming in so fast you can't stop.
The cheapness of this game is...
They'll knock you off stuff, and you lose a life when you get knocked off of the...
that hardly ever happens.
That's not true. It happens all...
The cheapness of this game is you do have enemies that will fire from off-screen sometimes.
Some of the bosses are super cheap.
No, they aren't. All the bosses are very easy. They all have patterns. You just have to... A lot of it is attack. You can't stop and hit 3 or 4 times. You have to go in, hit once or twice, and leave. Go in, hit once or twice, leave. If you just sit there and try to smack on them, they're going to kill you.
I'm going to get real comic book geeky on point out some of the things that bother me. Number one, Juggernaut, the man, the human Juggernaut, has a bazooka. Why?
Yeah.
Why would you give him a bazooka?
Well, you know, what else is he going to do?
Secondly, there's a scene where Kitty says they've got the profession. They usher you in, you're fighting Magneto. There's a couple of times where Mystique is screwing around with you. In the comics, Wolverine would have picked up on this immediately because he could smell her. So there's also that. I will say there's a few touches I enjoy. There's a section where you're standing on this cliff and Magneto appears. He goes, "X-Men, prepare to die."
No, welcome to die.
Welcome to die. And he blows the cliff open. And all your characters just fly down, except for Nightcrawler, who teleports.
Yeah.
Now, why Storm
Storm
doesn't fly? I don't know why, but she doesn't. My favorite character, I'm going to rank these characters in order from worst to best. My least favorite character is Cyclops. He sucks.
He's pretty bad.
Then I would say Storm. He is not good. I would put Wolverine's actually not that good. I don't like him. Cyclops is not great, but his power is good. Dazzler is quick, and so her hand-to-hand's good, but her power is tough to use because it's an arching throw that energy thing.
It's like a grenade.
The best guy in this game, mark it down for me, Nightcrawler. He's quick, he's agile, he's got great in-air moves, and he's got the best mutant power. He's the best guy.
I prefer Colossus.
Also, Colossus makes an annoying noise. Yeah, you can hear it all over the arcade.
Everywhere.
It's a stupid sound.
It's remarkable. I don't know how they've amplified that somehow, but they have.
So, but I mean, do I hate this game? No. Have I played it a million times? Yes. I'm a big X-Men fan. I've got the entire run of X-Men from 100 to the end of the first edition, and I've got about 50 under 100. So I'm a big fan of the X-Men. But this one, I would have loved it if this game would have came out a couple years later and they could have based it off the more modern cartoon, which was a much better cartoon.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I still, like I said before, I've got fond memory of this game. Personally, this came out in an arcade era where, 6-player games were unheard of. And this was something, if you could get 6 players around it, I mean literally 6 players around it, you could have a lot of fun just getting lost in the whole atmosphere of the thing. eBay-wise, good luck, sucker. First of all, finding the cabinet for this thing, impossible.
I wish we'd kept that motherboard now.
Yeah, well, the PCBs for this, the last one that sold, $600.
Oh, that one hurts me. We didn't get that much, did we?
The marquee for the 6-player cabinet, which is huge. It's basically 2 marquees put together, but it's one long piece of plastic.
Yeah.
$300
yeah.
for the marquee, people. That's ridiculous for a piece of plastic.
We sold a lot of PCBs back in the day, and who knew they were? I mean, I'm telling you, as we end this, they were giving them away. They were giving these PC. We had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We had X-Men. We had them all. Yeah. And they weren't worth butkus. Butkus, I tell you. And now you can't go anywhere. People demand them.
Yep.
It drives me nuts.
It's crazy time.
You know something else people demand?
Oh.
The wheel.
Oh.
Hit the music.
Oh.
All right, here we go.
All right.
Now, Brent, tell them what we added this week.
We added the CD32.
Oh, here we go.
I'm going to use my mutant power to avoid getting the CD32. Let's back up just a little bit here. All
dark
right.
in here. It's got dark.
Oh, Lord. Oh, this part's always death.
All right, go to work, sir. Yes, the Amiga CD32. And if we get that, we'll explain what's happening. But we figured, what the hell?
That's going to be, I believe that's Game & Watch?
The Game & Watch.
Oh, yes.
So, Brent, why don't you explain what the heck that's all about?
Game & Watch, Nintendo, before they were Nintendo, produced little handheld monochrome game systems. They were pretty darn famous, and we are going to review a couple of them for you next week.
I haven't played it with any of these since they were originally out, and some
Yes.
of my wealthier buddies had them. I didn't even ask for one, to be honest with you. So
Yeah, they were pricey even back in the day, and now they're ridiculous.
we're going to be going into a realm that I'm completely ignorant on, which that never happens. Never.
Oh.
So, join us next week for Game & Watch. And until then,
Excelsior!
X-Men!